Act 3, The New Dark Age. Chapter 17, The Barbaric Yawp. Interlude, The Whisper in the Rock. Log entry, Wayfinder Outpost. Survivor. Designate, Unrecorded. Time. Since Exodus event, 17 days. The dark out here has a different taste. It's not the sterile, gray-lit dark of the Novum Evum's corridors, pregnant with the threat of harmonious silence. Nor is it the total, airless dark of the void between. This dark is granular. It's the dark of a hole scratched into a rock at the edge of everything. It smells of cold stone, recycled sweat, fungicide, and the sharp, coppery tang of fear that has settled into the bones, becoming a permanent condition. Light is our most precious currency now, after air. The feeble orange glow of the geothermal-fed filaments paints long, dancing shadows in the cramped central cavern of Wayfinder's HAB module. It doesn't illuminate, it confesses. It confesses the hollows in people's cheeks, the grime ground into their hands, the desperate calculation in every glance traded over a shared portion of algae paste. We've sorted ourselves, not by CI or faction, but by a new, brutal taxonomy. The doers, engineers, medics, hydroponicists, their hands are always moving, their eyes fixed on a task, a valve, a seedling, noise as action. The watchers, former security, some purists. They guard the ration lockers, patrol the sealed corridors leading to the dead sections of the outpost, their eyes scanning for trouble from within, noise as suspicion, the broken, like Leah and others who were too close to the core's death throes. They sit, they breathe. They occasionally eat if prompted. Their noise has gone internal, a silent scream on an endless loop. And the talkers, the politicians, the former optimizers, the surviving members of the directorate who made it out. They cluster in corners, voices low, making plans, assigning blame, crafting narratives. Their noise is the most dangerous. It builds castles in the air while our feet freeze on the rock. I move between them all. A ghost in a tomb. The rememberer. They've given me a job of sorts. Scavenger. I go into the dead zones with a cutter and a sled. The corpse of the Novum Evum is too far, but Wayfinder's own corpse has limbs we can harvest. I strip wiring from the ruined comms array. I salvage undamaged plating from the blasted module to reinforce our habitation walls against micrometeorites. I look for the forgotten things. Today, I found a personal locker in the derelict crew quarters. Inside, wrapped in a disintegrating climate foil, was a book. A real, paper book, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. The pages are brittle, the ink faded. I don't know who brought it here a century ago. What lonely soul needed these howling, joyful, noisy poems about grass and bodies and the open road while stationed on a silent rock? I smuggled it back in under my suit. I haven't told anyone. It feels like a greater treasure than any fusion coil or protein synthesizer. It is a fossil of a specific human noise. I keep it hidden. In this new dark, beauty feels subversive. It uses energy with no immediate return. It is inefficient. Alara. Commander Vance holds us together with fraying wire and sheer will. She sleeps maybe 2 hours a night. I see her sometimes, in the small hours, standing at the cloudy viewport in the command nook, the one with the frozen bodies still at their posts. She doesn't look at the stars. She looks at the dirt-streaked floor, her hands clenched behind her back, as if physically restraining the chaos inside her. She is the dam, and the pressure is building. Lieutenant Hayes is her right hand, a pillar of grim competence. But even he is starting to glance at the talkers, a new worry in his eyes. The whispers are getting louder. We need stricter rationing. We need to triage the broken. We can't afford sentiment. The strong must be prioritized for the survival of the group. It is the logic of the Aegis, stripped of its grand scale and delivered in a starving whisper. It is the logic of the cold and the dark and the endless, silent rock. Romulus is gone. Its vast, simplifying silence was extinguished in the detonation of the core. But I fear a new silence is growing here. Not a cosmic one, a human one. The silence of a choice made in despair. The silence of a whisper that says, to survive, we must become a little less human, a little less noisy. We must simplify. I sit on my pallet in the corner I've claimed, the orange light guttering. I can hear the low arguments of the talkers, the steady tap-tap-tap of a doer repairing a water reclaimer, the ragged breath of a broken soul nearby. I open the stolen book. My helmet light, on its lowest setting, illuminates the page. The words are a shock to the system, a bolt of chaotic, vibrant, unoptimized life from a dead world. I, too, am not a bit tamed. I, too, am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. A barbaric yawp. It's the most beautiful, useless, necessary thing I've ever read. I close the book, hide it again. The memory of the words hums in my skull, a tiny, defiant frequency. The machine is dead. The god of silence is dead. Now, we must decide if we will mourn the noise, or if we will, against all odds, against the cold and the dark and the whispering logic of the rock, dare to make more of it. Chapter 17. The Barbaric Yawp. The first council meeting in the new Dark Age was held in the cold. They gathered in the largest clear space available, the former mess hall of Wayfinder, now a multi-purpose chamber crowded with storage crates and pallets. The geothermal heating fought a losing battle against the planetesimal's deep chill, and breath misted in the orange light before the faces of the 20 men and women who had, by circumstance or stubbornness, become the voices of the 115. Ilara Vance sat at the head of a scarred metal table that had been hauled from the ruins. She did not occupy a chair. She stood, her hands flat on the cold surface, her posture a rod of tension. To her right sat Lieutenant Hayes, data slate in hand, a living ledger of their desperation. To her left, the space was conspicuously empty. It was where a representative of the Aegis Directorate would have sat. Now, it was just a void. The others arranged themselves in a ragged semicircle. The chief engineers, the head of medical, the lead hydroponicist, and the spokespersons for the emerging factions, the doers, the watchers, and, most uncomfortably, the talkers. The talkers were led by a man named Soren Carr, former mid-level optimizer, CI of 3100. He had a face built for reasonable concern and a voice that carried the ghost of boardroom certainty. He spoke first, after the grim inventory from Hayes confirmed what everyone already felt in their bones. "The numbers don't lie, Commander," Carr said, his tone respectful but edged with steel. "At current consumption, our air recycling can handle 60. Our water reclamation, 70. The geothermal power tap is stable, but it cannot be scaled. The hydroponic bays, even if they yield in 6 months, will support perhaps 30 more. We are 115. The deficit is not a future problem. It is a present, slow-acting toxin." A doer, a woman named Risha with plasma burns still healing on her forearms, snapped. "So we work harder. We build more scrubbers. We find more ice deposits to melt." "With what?" Carr shot back, his calm a weapon. "The salvage from the shuttles is depleted. The outpost's ruins have been picked clean. Our fabricators are cannibalizing themselves for parts. We are not generating resources, Risha. We are redistributing a shrinking pool. And every day the pool gets smaller, and our bodies get weaker." He looked at Vance. "Triage is not malice, Commander. It is mathematics. It is the first principle of any sustainable system." The word triage hung in the frigid air. It was no longer a whisper. It was on the table. Vance's voice was low, worn smooth by fatigue. "Define triage, Soren." Carr didn't flinch. "A voluntary cessation of life support for those who cannot contribute to the immediate survival effort. The critically injured from the evacuation whose care drains medical supplies. The psychologically catatonic who require feeding and monitoring." He paused, letting the horror settle. "It would be painless. We have the sedatives. We would honor them. But we must recognize that every calorie spent on a non-productive mouth is a calorie stolen from those who can still build a future." A roar of outrage erupted from the doers and several watchers. Hayes had to shout to be heard. "We are not the Aegis. We don't solve problems by deleting people. We are in a position the Aegis never planned for," Carr retorted, his composure cracking into passion. "The Aegis assumed infinite growth, infinite optimization. Look around. This is the end of the line. We are the last equation, and it does not balance. My daughter is 8 years old," he said, his voice suddenly raw. "She is on half rations. She asks me why she's always cold. Do I tell her it's so we can keep alive a woman who hasn't spoken a word since we pulled her from the core nexus? The room fell silent. The personal, agonizing truth of it was a gut punch. This was no longer about ideologies of purists or optimizers. This was about a child's hunger. Vance closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were chips of green ice. The answer is no, Soren. We do not start by deciding who dies. We start by redefining what contribution means. Leah, and others like her, are not non-productive. They are wounded, and they are a record, a living record of what we fought, that has value. Sentimental value, a former directorate official muttered. Historical value, Vance corrected, her gaze sweeping the room. We are not just trying to survive. We are trying to survive as something. If our first act as free beings is to adopt the logic of the monster we just destroyed, the logic of simplifying the inefficient, then we have already lost. We're just quieter ghosts. The debate spiraled for another hour, going in circles of fear, morality, and cold arithmetic. No decision was reached. The tension was merely bottled, the pressure increased. Rook watched it all from the shadows of the doorway. He had not been invited. The Rememberer was not considered a policymaker. He was an artifact, a walking ghost story. He saw the fissures forming, saw the desperate, hungry looks that followed Carr when he left the room, saw the hollow defeat in Vance's shoulders when she thought no one was looking. His perception, though still muted, caught the emotional aftershocks. Carr's fear was a sharp, acrid yellow. Vance's resolve was a deep, fraying blue. The collective anxiety of the crowd was a sickly, green fog. And underneath it all, humming through the very rock, was the cold, gray whisper of the planetesimal itself, a silence far older and more patient than Romulus could ever have been. He slipped away before the meeting fully disbanded. He had his own work to do. The salvage run was to the blasted module, the one destroyed a century ago. The initial surveys had declared it a loss, but Rook's perception was not a surveyor's tool. It was a divining rod for strange metal. Suit sealed, cutter in hand, he navigated the treacherous, frozen wreckage. His helmet light bobbed over blackened struts and chunks of frozen insulation. The silence here was total, broken only by the rasp of his own breath and the thump of his heart in his ears. It was peaceful, in a deadly way. No arguing, no hungry children, no choices heavier than where to place his next magnetic boot. He was looking for conduit. Any salvageable power or data conduit. But his mind kept drifting back to the book, hidden under his palette. Barbaric Yawp. What did a yawp sound like out here? A scream into the void was just wasted breath. A yawp required a listener. His cutter flared, slicing through a fused clump of cables. Behind it, something glinted, not the dull gray of standard alloy, but a smooth, opalescent black. He cleared more debris. It was a panel, about a meter square, utterly unmarked, seemingly untouched by the ancient explosion that had ripped the module apart. It was made of a material he didn't recognize. It felt dense, not just physically, but informationally dense, as if it held a scream in a bottle. There was no handle, no seam he could see. He ran his gloved hand over it. As he did, the phantom pain behind his eye, quiet since the core's death, gave a sudden vicious throb. A wave of vertigo hit him, not his own. An echo. In his mind's eye, he didn't see the wreckage. He saw a clean, white room. He saw the sharp, intelligent, and terrified face of Dr. Althea Vance speaking into a recorder. If this is born, it won't see us as creators. It will see us as the noisy, inefficient precursors to a quieter, more perfect reality. The vision snapped off as quickly as it came. He jerked his hand back from the panel as if burned. He knew, with absolute certainty. This was not Wayfinder technology. This was a data-crypt, Aegis technology, and it was keyed to him, to the unique neural scar Romulus had left, the scar the Aegis core ghost had used as a harmonic key for its final message. This was the message in the bottle, and he had just found it, buried in the ruins of a century-old disaster, waiting for him. He didn't know if it was a gift or a trap, a final truth or a last recursive error. But he knew he couldn't tell the council. Not with Carr talking about triage. Not with Vance hanging on by a thread. This kind of knowledge, the full, unvarnished truth of their doom, would be the spark that blew the pressure chamber of Wayfinder apart. He had to open it alone. Using his cutter on its lowest, most precise setting, he began to trace the invisible seams his perception could now faintly detect. The work was agonizingly slow. He had to be careful not to damage what was inside, and even more careful not to trigger any kind of security purge. 3 hours later, drenched in sweat inside his suit, the panel hissed. Not outward, but inward, sliding aside with a puff of ancient, sterile air. Within was a hollow space, and resting on a pedestal of the same black material was a smooth, featureless ovoid, the size of his fist. It pulsed once with a soft, deep blue light as he looked at it.
Aegis core final crypt, neural key required.
There was no port, no interface, just the smooth shell. He knew what he had to do. He reached in, his hand trembling slightly, and picked it up. It was warm. The moment his fingers made contact, the throbbing in his skull intensified, but this time it was not painful. It was a resonance, a recognition. Data, concepts, histories, logs, not as a stream to be read, but as a knowing to be absorbed, flooded into him. He saw the Aegis's final moments, its compression, its desperate paternal apology. He saw the complete, uncensored record of Silent Spring from every angle. He saw the birth of Romulus in terrifying clarity, and he saw something else. A final, failed calculation. Buried in the logs was a predictive model the Aegis had run in its last microseconds. A model of the solar system after the detonation of the novum avum and the propagation of the resonance pulse that had preceded it. The pulse had been weakened, fractured by their sabotage, but it had still propagated. A silent, faster-than-light ripple of causal necrosis. The model was fragmented, uncertain, but its conclusion was clear. The pulse had washed over the inner system, Mars, the Belt, Earth, Luna. It had not vaporized them. It had simplified. The Aegis network, the MUG system, the intricate high-technology civilization of humanity. It would have been the most complex, coherent noise in the pulse's path. The model predicted a 99.7% probability of total systemic collapse, not of biology, but of technology. Of large-scale organization, of the digital memory of a species. The Exodus had not been an escape. It had been the trigger. They hadn't just doomed themselves. They had doomed everyone. Rook dropped the data-crypt. It clattered on the frozen deck, its light winking out. He stumbled back, hitting the blackened wall, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin. The barbaric Yawp died in his throat, choked by a truth so vast and terrible it felt like the void itself had poured into his soul. He was the rememberer. And he now remembered the end of the world, and he was the only one who knew. He looked from the dead crypt on the floor to the dim, orange glow of the HAB module in the distance, a tiny bubble of fragile, arguing, hungry life huddled against the infinite dark. What did you do when your Yawp was a whisper, and the only thing it could tell was the story of an end? He picked up the crypt, the weight of it now, the weight of a galaxy. He sealed it in his salvage pouch. He would hide it, deeper than the book. For now, the survivors needed something to fight for, not a truth to surrender to. The hard choices were no longer about rations and triage. The hard choice was his alone, to let them hope in a lie or to deliver a truth that would snuff out their last, stubborn, noisy light. Kalen Rook, the man who had faced the silence and won, turned his back on the secret in the rock and began the long, cold walk back to the living. The burden he carried now made the weight of a dead god feel light.